Most Pokemon evolve. It's a core part of the franchise and it's a really good way to upgrade your team before going into a difficult fight. A lot of Pokemon evolve at a time that makes sense. For example, starters usually evolve at around 16 and 36, which is just about when they start to feel outclassed by the Pokemon around them. But there are some Pokemon out there who evolve way later in the game than they should, and they feel like a dead weight on your team. This video is going to break down the Pokemon who I think evolve too late. The first Pokemon I want to talk about is Snorunt, who evolves into Glalie at level 42. Snorunt has base 50 in every stat, so he's incredibly weak and will struggle to be useful from around level 15 onwards. When he finally evolves, his base 50 stats all just go up to base 80, which isn't really worth waiting around for. When Snorunt was introduced in the Hoenn games, you could catch him at around level 30 in Shoal Cave, and if you decide to use one, he's going to be one of those Pokemon who you catch and immediately give the experience share until he evolves. Trying to actually use a Snorunt when you're fighting level 30s and 40s is impossible. Snorunt's other evolution, Frostlass, is a stone evolution. Female Snorunts evolve using a Dawnstone. I used a Snorunt in Pokemon Sword once, and I was able to get a Dawnstone and evolve it into a Frostlass before the first gym. Frostlass was a pretty good Pokemon to have that early on, but it didn't feel too overpowered. Frostlass and Glalie have the same base stat total, 480, so being able to get one of them whenever you want, and the other once most of your team has already fully evolved, feels really unfair. They do have the same BST, but Glalie's actually worse than Frostlass, since its stats are perfectly well-rounded, while Frostlass sacrifices some defenses to be much faster, and as an ice type, defenses really aren't something you need. I think Glalie should be a stone evolution as well, to make it easy to obtain like Frostlass, and I think an ice stone would be perfect for that. If I asked you to guess what level Skrelp evolves into Dragalge, what would you say? 30, 35, maybe 40 at the most? Well, you'd be very wrong, since Skrelp doesn't evolve until level 48. That's the same level Gabite evolves into Garchomp. It doesn't have a base stat higher than 60, so it's going to get outclassed unbelievably quickly. In Pokemon Y, you catch it at level 25, so it's already too weak to be used. It has a lower base stat total than already weak Pokemon like Teddiursa, Finneon, and Spoink. In Generation 6, if you keep your team all around the same level, going into the 6th or 7th gym, your team could be Greninja, Gardevoir, Mega Venusaur, Crocodile, Flygon, and Skrelp. It's a version-exclusive Pokemon, and its counterpart, Clauncher, evolves at 37, which is definitely better than 48, but it still feels too late. I think they could both evolve at level 30. Skrelp and Clauncher are too weak to use past around level 20, but Dragalge and Chloritza are too strong to get any earlier than that. Next, I want to talk about two Pokemon who don't evolve at a specific level, but in a specific place, Crabrawler and Charjabug. In Pokemon Sun and Moon, Crabrawler will evolve on Mount Lanakila, which is this game's Victory Road, and Charjabug will evolve in the Grand Pony Canyon, which is one of the last places you get access to. Neither of these Pokemon are great. Crabrawler has lower stats than Koffing, and while Charjabug does have better moves and stats than you'd expect for a middle stage bug, waiting until the mid-40s to evolve is way too late. Also, their evolutions, Crabominable and Vikavolt, aren't anything special. Crabominable is a slow ice type with low defenses, and even though Vikavolt has 145 special attack, its base 43 speed makes it pretty difficult to use. I wouldn't be surprised if people ditch these Pokemon after looking up when they evolve and what they evolve into. I think if Charjabug was slightly better, it could actually be usable. If it had, say, an extra 20 points added to its HP, special attack, and special defense, it could maybe be usable at least until the mid to late 30s, but it would probably have to hold an Eviolite, which boosts the defenses of unevolved Pokemon. Also, if Vikavolt have more speed, say base 110, it would actually be worth waiting for. I don't think I could make any reasonable changes to Crabrawler that would help it stay viable until the end of the game. I don't want to just buff its stats because it's an early game Pokemon and I don't want to make it too strong. I think one solution would be to just make it a level up evolution at around 27, but a better solution would be to just make it evolve with an Ice Stone. Crabrawler was introduced in the same generation as the Ice Stone, but for some reason he couldn't use it to evolve until Generation 9. So they evolve at the very end of the game in Sun and Moon, but Ultra Sun and Moon actually somewhat fix this issue. In these games, you can access Mount Lanakila earlier, just before the Ghost Trial, so Crabrawler can evolve at around level 35, and Charjabug can evolve in the Blush Mountain at around the same point in the game. It would have made so much more sense for them to just evolve in these places in the original Sun and Moon. Going all the way back to Gen 1, I want to talk about Ponyta, who evolves into Rapidash at level 40. Now, Ponyta doesn't actually have the worst stats in the world. 85 attack and 90 speed are probably more than you'd expect, and a 410 base stat total is one of the highest BSTs for an unevolved Pokemon, being about the same as a middle stage starter, but still, waiting until level 40 feels a bit too high. In a game like Pokemon Platinum, you can catch a Ponyta before the first gym, and other Pokemon available before the first gym, like Starly and Shinx, will have already evolved twice before Ponyta even evolves once. There's a few games where Ponyta is only available in the late game, but that just makes it feel like Snorunt, someone who you catch and then immediately give the experience share to until they evolve. I think a simple solution to this would be to make Ponyta evolve at any level between 30 and 35, but a more interesting solution would be to buff Ponyta to make it more usable later on. Its stats aren't bad, and with a few good physical moves like maybe Jump Kick at level 30 and Blaze Kick at 35, Ponyta would probably be able to keep up and stay useful until level 40. Another Gen 1 Pokemon who evolves late is Slowpoke, who won't evolve into Slowbro until level 37. I like Slowbro more than Slowking, but whenever I use a Slowpoke, I evolve it into Slowking instead. You get Slowking by trading Slowpoke while he's holding a King's Rock, which is a lot easier than dragging a Slowpoke up to level 37. Slowpoke is a really difficult Pokemon to use. It's obviously slow, but it's also not very defensive, which is never a good combination. 90 HP is nice, but 65 defense and only 40 special defense leave a lot to be desired. As soon as you're fighting Pokemon stronger than around level 20, pretty much every opponent is going to be doing more than half your health in one hit. Slowpoke also can't do much damage. As a water and psychic type, it mainly learns special attacks, but its special attack is only 40, and its physical attack isn't amazing either at 65. Even with strong special attacks like Surf, which you can get pretty early in the Johto games, Slowpoke struggles to do any meaningful damage. If I use a Slowpoke in Heart Gold or Soul Silver, I catch one in the Slowpoke well, don't use it for the next 3 gyms, and then evolve it into Slowking as soon as I get the King's Rock. You can get Slowking at any level since it's a trade evolution, so I think it would only be fair if you could get Slowbro at any level as well. Evolving with a Water Stone makes sense, and also make sure you can still evolve it if you don't have anyone to trade with. The last individual Pokemon I want to look at is Noibat, who evolves into Noivern at level 48. This feels like a joke. Noibat's base stats range from 35 to 50, so having to use him past level 10 is a struggle. His base stat total is 245, which is lower than Hoppip and Spinarak. I once tried to use a Noibat in Pokemon Ultramoon, where he's obtainable really early on, but I literally had to level him up with the experience share for the entire game. He isn't even usable on the first island where you're fighting weak, unevolved Pokemon, like Growlithe and Psyduck. Thankfully, in his debut game, X and Y, you can catch him in the mid-40s, so he won't take too long to evolve with the experience share, but trying to actually use Noibat in battle will drive you crazy. Noivern is actually a good Pokemon with decent stats. It has 123 speed, 97 special attack, and either 70 or 80 in everything else, so there isn't really a happy medium for when Noibat should evolve. I think the absolute earliest you could get a Noivern without it being overpowered would be around level 30, but like I said before, it's impossible for Noibat to be used up to that level. The fan-made game, Inclement Emerald, changed Noibat to be a friendship evolution, but I don't think people really like that mechanic since raising friendship takes so long, and your Pokemon fainting can reduce its friendship, which Noibat will do all the time if you actually use it in battle. I also think there's too big of a jump in power for something like a trade evolution or Duskstone to make sense. If you could get Noivern as soon as you get Noibat, you would either be getting Noivern way too early, or we'd have to put Noibat in a late game area at a really high level. So instead, I think they should have a middle evolution. If Noibat evolves at level 15, the new middle stage evolution could then evolve into Noivern at level 40. That way, both Pokemon get to be usable and there's no item or mechanic standing in the way. Finally, I want to talk about the elephant in the room, Gen 5. Pokemon Black and White are infamous for their ridiculous evolution levels. Scraggy evolves at level 39, Meanfu at 50, and Zvilas won't evolve into Hydreigon until 64. I could easily name a bunch more, but I'd be here all day. Now, there is actually some good theory behind this. It forces you to use each Pokemon for a few levels, rather than just catching them and evolving them right away. Playing through the original Black and White, the only Pokemon you can evolve straight after catching it is Shelmet, who needs to be traded with a Carablast that you get a few routes earlier. Every other Pokemon has to be leveled up for quite a few levels after you catch them. In practice, these high evolution levels just lead to a lot of Pokemon being really difficult to use. Meanfu evolves at 50, but it has really low stats, similar to other weak Pokemon like Elekid and Drifloon. If a Pokemon evolves at 50, it should be able to keep up until level 50, but Meanfu really doesn't have the stats to be used that late in the game. It seems like the developers knew this was going to be an issue because Black and White are the games that introduced the Eviolite. They were probably aware that the majority of your team was going to spend most of the game in their first or middle stage, and instead of fixing it by lowering the evolution levels, they made an item that only somewhat patches up the issue. There's two problems with the Eviolite. The first is that it only boosts your defenses, so a Pokemon like Meanfu who's a fast attacker with low health and bulk doesn't really benefit from it. and the other problem is that you can only get one per game. In Black and White, you can only catch Generation 5 Pokemon, so you're likely to have more than one Pokemon who would need the Eviolite to get them through the last few levels before evolving. The Gen 5 evolution levels also present an issue when Unova Pokemon get put into other games. You can catch Rufflet and Vullaby on the first island in Sun and Moon, around level 12, but if you want to use Braviary or Mandibuzz, you'll have to keep these unevolved weaklings on your team until the very end of the game. This generally just makes Gen 5 Pokemon unappealing to use. I really like Braviary, but I would never consider using one in Pokemon Sun because I don't want to carry around a dead weight for the whole game. Some fans say that Pokemon should have different evolution levels in different regions. For example, Rufflets in Unova would evolve at 54, but in Alola they would evolve at 30. That's an alright solution, but I think a better solution is just to lower the evolution levels altogether. If I catch a Rufflet at level 12 and it evolves at level 30, but then in another game I catch it at 25 and it doesn't evolve until 40, it won't be any more useful past level 30 compared to the Rufflet I caught at level 12. I think the best way to fix this is just to lower their evolution levels and keep them lowered. I'm not surprised that the earlier games have some crazy evolution levels. There was a lot of experimentation in Gen 1, 2 and 3, but it's strange to me that Pokemon introduced in later games like Gen 6 and 7 are still evolving at weird levels. You would have thought that Nintendo would have realised by now that we don't want to use weak Pokemon into the 40s and 50s. If you enjoyed the video, consider hitting like and subscribe, as it really helps out me and my channel. Thanks for watching and hopefully, I'll see you next time.